What if the woman you married, the one you left your country for, the one you defended against your own family, turned out to be keeping a secret so devastating it felt like a betrayal not just to you, but to your late mother's memory? Imagine walking into a quiet room, opening a jewelry case that should have been filled with treasures passed down to honor your mother's legacy, only to find pieces missing. Not just any pieces. Princess Diana's jewels. Gone. And whispers spreading that they had been sold, piece by piece, to the highest bidder. This is the story that leaves us asking, what did Prince Harry discover, and why did it drive him to urge King Charles to take the ultimate step, stripping Meghan Markle of her titles? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It begins with Diana. Her jewelry wasn't just decoration. Each piece symbolized something greater. A necklace gifted on the night she was crowned the people's princess. Earrings she wore when she walked through minefields to shine a light on human suffering. Rings, brooches, tiaras, they weren't mere ornaments. They were pieces of history, infused with emotion, with sacrifice, with tragedy. For Harry, those jewels were more than gold and diamonds. They were his mother's living heartbeat, the only tangible pieces he could touch after losing her at just 12 years old. And now, decades later, he discovered some of those treasures weren't where they should have been. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, what would you do if you believed someone you loved had tampered with the last physical connection to the person you lost? Would you explode in rage? Would you collapse in despair? Would you demand answers? Harry reportedly did all of the above. The shocking part isn't just that Meghan allegedly had access to Diana's jewelry. After all, she wore pieces of it publicly. The aquamarine cocktail ring at her wedding reception, the butterfly earrings during that infamous Australian tour. What unsettled the public was the possibility that jewels never meant to leave the royal vaults were being used as currency. Quietly moved, quietly sold, quietly disappearing. Why does this matter now? Timing is everything. The monarchy is in a fragile moment. King Charles fighting illness, William preparing for kingship, the firm balancing its image against constant modern scandal. And here comes another allegation that threatens to rip open wounds not just for Harry, but for the entire nation that still clings to Diana's memory. Consider this. Meghan has long been accused of turning royal heritage into Hollywood spectacle. Critics say she wore Diana's pieces not to honor, but to signal, to claim Diana's story as her own shield, her own narrative of victimhood and strength. But what happens when symbolism tips into scandal? When jewelry meant for inheritance becomes a commodity? This isn't just about jewels. It's about loyalty, about betrayal, about Harry facing the possibility that the woman who promised to protect him from the pain of his past might be profiting from it. Imagine the scene. Harry, pacing a Montecito room. A velvet jewelry box open before him. The slots where Diana's sapphire earrings should be, empty. The brooch Diana wore to countless charity galas, gone. And reports emerging from London. Auction houses whispering of unidentified sellers, with pieces eerily similar to Diana's. He confronts Meghan. She denies. She deflects. She insists she has a right as his wife to choose what to do with her gifts. But here's the twist. Were they even hers to give? Were they truly gifts, or were they on loan? Part of Diana's legacy meant for the royal bloodline, not to be traded like props in a Hollywood script. This is where the story ignites. Harry, torn between his marriage and his mother's memory. The palace, alarmed at the possibility that private treasures were slipping through their fingers. King Charles, forced to consider the unthinkable, whether his own daughter-in-law had crossed a line so severe it warranted stripping her of the very titles she once claimed gave her dignity. Now let's pause. Why do people care so much about titles? In today's world, titles might seem symbolic, almost outdated. But within the monarchy, titles mean power. They mean privilege. They mean access. And for Meghan, whose critics argue she has leveraged every ounce of her duchess status to propel her brand, losing that would be the ultimate humiliation. And that's exactly what Harry is said to have urged his father to consider. Stripping Meghan of the Duchess of Sussex title, leaving her not as Her Royal Highness, not even as Duchess, but as plain Meghan Markle, Hollywood actress turned estranged royal. But what drove Harry to such a breaking point? Love had carried him through years of backlash. He defended her in interviews, in lawsuits, in family fights. He gave up his home, his military roles, his place in the royal inner circle, all from Meghan. Yet this, the betrayal tied to his mother's legacy, was one step too far. The question we must ask ourselves is this: was Harry protecting Diana's honor, or was he trying to save himself from the growing realization that his marriage was built on contradictions too painful to face? Because let's not forget, the jewelry wasn't just valuable sentimentally. Financially, Diana's collection was worth millions. And that opens another question. If pieces were sold, where did the money go? To luxury mansions? Private jets? Designer wardrobes? Or to fund a lifestyle built on the very royalty Meghan claimed she wanted to escape from? Do you see the irony here? Meghan and Harry told the world they wanted independence from the crown. They wanted freedom. Yet time and again, their power, their wealth, their influence came not from independence, but from clinging tightly to the royal ties they criticized. Selling Diana's jewels, if proven true, would be the ultimate contradiction. And now, Harry faced a choice: side with Meghan and risk erasing his mother's legacy forever, or side with his father and brother, demanding that Meghan face consequences unlike anything the royal family had dared to impose before. This is where the story transforms from scandal into Shakespearean tragedy. A son torn between love and duty. A widow's jewels becoming the weapon that splits a family. A king forced to weigh mercy against justice. And a woman, Meghan, caught between her desire for status and the reality of her crumbling standing in both Hollywood and the palace. So here we stand, at the edge of the storm. The palace silent but alert. The press circling like vultures. Harry pacing, torn. Meghan defiant, refusing to admit guilt. And Charles, the monarch who once swore to protect Diana, now confronted with the task of protecting her legacy from within his own family. But just when Harry thought he had uncovered the full extent of the betrayal, another revelation emerged. One that would not only test his marriage, but also the very fabric of the monarchy itself. Because the jewels were just the beginning. Every story has a beginning, and when it comes to Diana's jewels, the beginning is steeped in both beauty and tragedy. These weren't just glittering stones kept in a locked box. They were threads woven into the tapestry of the late Princess of Wales' life. To understand why Harry's alleged discovery matters so much, we have to go back to the heart of Diana's legacy and to the very jewels that became symbols of her spirit. Think about it. When Diana stepped into the public eye at just 19 years old, suddenly thrust into the role of fiancée to the future king, the world couldn't look away. The engagement ring, that iconic sapphire surrounded by diamonds, wasn't just a token of promise. It was a public statement. A choice that shocked courtiers because she picked it from a catalog instead of having it custom-made. Bold, independent, unconventional. That ring wasn't only Diana's. It became William's choice for Kate decades later. Proof that every jewel held meaning far beyond its carats. Now imagine the collection as a whole. Necklaces given as wedding gifts from foreign leaders. Tiaras borrowed from the Queen Mother's vault. Earrings purchased by Diana herself on trips abroad. Each piece held a story. Each carried a moment of history. And for Harry, who lost her before he was even a teenager, those pieces weren't just sparkling accessories. They were memories he could physically touch. Memories he clung to when the rest of the world tried to move on. But here's the haunting question. What happens when those memories vanish? When a brooch disappears from the velvet tray, when earrings once worn at charity galas resurface in shady private sales. The grief doesn't just resurface, it multiplies. Because losing the jewels isn't just losing objects. It's losing fragments of Diana all over again. This is why the public obsession with Diana's jewelry endures. It's not because of their price tags. It's because of what they represented. The sapphire and pearl choker she wore during her famous dance with John Travolta at the White House. The diamond tiara sparkling at state dinners. A smile plastered on her face even as her marriage unraveled. Jewelry, in Diana's story, became armor. Shields she wore in public, often while suffering in private. Harry knows this better than anyone. He once said, in interviews, that the scent of his mother, the sound of her laughter, the touch of her hands, those are things memory cannot hold onto forever. But a necklace she wore? A ring? A tiara? Those are tangible, solid, unchanging. Unless, of course, they are taken. Unless they are sold. Now let's zoom in on the distribution of Diana's jewels after her death. When she tragically passed in 1997, her will included specific instructions. Her sons should inherit her jewelry. Not to hoard, not to lock away, but so that their future wives could one day wear them. It was meant to be a bridge across generations, ensuring Diana's presence would always be felt at royal weddings, christenings, state events. For William, that promise was fulfilled when Kate wore Diana's sapphire engagement ring. For Harry, that promise was kept alive when Meghan wore Diana's aquamarine ring on her wedding day. But here lies the contradiction. If those jewels were meant as gifts of legacy, how did some pieces allegedly end up missing? How did whispers begin of private auction houses listing items, eerily identical, to pieces Diana once cherished? Audience, pause and ask yourself, who would dare to cash in on Diana's legacy? Would it be a stranger with access to palace storage? Or someone within the family, someone with permission, trust, or proximity? It's here that suspicion naturally turns toward Meghan. Because she was often seen wearing Diana's jewelry. Because she made statements about how those pieces connected her to Harry's late mother. And because, when rumors of missing jewels emerged, critics pointed their fingers at the most divisive royal figure of the modern era. But let's not rush. Before judgment, we need to understand why these jewels matter more than just personal adornment. Consider the cultural weight. Diana's image was built not just on her compassion, but on her style. A style that sent messages. When she wore pearls, it wasn't just elegance, it was restraint. When she wore sapphires, it was loyalty. When she wore diamonds, it was power. Every choice was scrutinized, every appearance photographed, every necklace and bracelet analyzed in papers the next morning. That legacy didn't vanish with her death. It intensified, which means that for Harry, any abuse of that legacy feels like a direct insult to his mother's memory. And here comes the irony. Harry spent years telling the public he wanted to protect Meghan the way no one protected his mother. He said history would not repeat itself. He would shield Meghan from the same cruel glare Diana suffered. Yet now, the very woman he swore to protect was allegedly mishandling the one thing that remained untarnished, Diana's jewelry. This isn't just scandal. It's Shakespearean irony. Let's take one specific example. The butterfly earrings. Simple, delicate, worn by Diana in 1986 during a tour of Canada. Fast forward to 2018. Meghan wears the same earrings on her tour of Australia with Harry. The symbolism was clear. Diana, too, had visited Australia with Charles as a young wife. Meghan wanted to echo that, present herself as Diana's natural successor. The photos made headlines. But years later, those same earrings would be cited in whispers about missing pieces. How could anyone know for sure which were safe in royal vaults and which had slipped into private circulation? Here's another. The aquamarine cocktail ring. Bold, shimmering, worn by Diana after her divorce as a symbol of independence. Meghan wore it on her wedding day as she rode off in a Jaguar with Harry. It was seen as a powerful connection between the two women, Diana closing a chapter, Meghan beginning hers. But when reports emerged of items being sold, the aquamarine's value skyrocketed in conversation. Was it truly safe? Or had replicas and mystery sales begun blurring the line between ownership and exploitation? The mystery deepens. Because while the public sees what's worn, they don't see what's missing behind closed doors. They don't see the boxes stored away in palace vaults. They don't see the inventory lists meant to keep track of Diana's treasures. They don't see the exchanges, the conversations, the permissions. What they do see is the effect, the perception, the headlines. Diana's jewels missing? Who's selling off the princess's legacy? And when perception mixes with scandal, the damage is as good as done. So for Harry, every missing piece wasn't just an object lost. It was another knife in his mother's memory. It was betrayal, not only of family, but of trust. And this is where we find the cliffhanger. Because Diana's jewels, as sacred as they were, might only be the beginning of something much darker. If the whispers about their disappearance are true, if Meghan was indeed at the center of these alleged sales, then we are looking at more than scandal. We are looking at a direct challenge to the monarchy's ability to guard its own legacy. But Harry wasn't the only one watching. Behind the palace walls, others began to take notice. Because if jewels could vanish, what else could be compromised? And that question leads us straight into the next chapter. Because while Diana's jewels set the stage for heartbreak, Meghan's own controversial history with jewelry would pour gasoline on an already raging fire. Every jewel tells a story. But when Meghan Markle wears a jewel, the story often spirals into something else entirely: scandal, symbolism, or suspicion. It's almost uncanny how often jewelry has followed her, shaping narratives that either elevate her as a modern royal or paint her as someone exploiting symbols for personal gain. And when we step back and trace the history, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. Let's start with the very beginning. Meghan's entrance into the royal family was already explosive, but her jewelry choices on key occasions ignited debates far beyond fashion columns. Think back to her first royal tour with Harry, Australia, 2018. Newly married, newly pregnant, and suddenly under the world's microscope. The press caught Meghan wearing a pair of delicate butterfly earrings and a gold bracelet that once belonged to Diana. On the surface, a touching tribute. But beneath, it became fuel for controversy. Some called it moving, a symbol that Diana's spirit was guiding Meghan. Others saw it as audacious, a woman barely months into royal life already adorning herself with Diana's legacy, as if claiming ownership of the late princess's memory. The moment split opinion. Admirers swooned. Critics sharpened their knives. Here's the hook. Why is Meghan's jewelry so controversial compared to other royals? Kate Middleton wears Diana's sapphire engagement ring and gets praised for honoring the legacy. Meghan wears earrings and is accused of milking Diana's ghost. Why? Part of it is timing. Part of it is perception. And part of it, critics argue, is because Meghan often chose to wear those pieces during her most controversial moments. Think about the Oprah interview. Meghan sitting there, dressed in muted tones, tears welling in her eyes. But what sparkled on her ears? Diana's diamond tennis bracelet. Suddenly, the interview wasn't just Meghan's story. It was framed, visually and symbolically, as Diana's story being retold through Meghan. A deliberate choice? Or a coincidence? Let's push deeper. Meghan has long understood the language of symbolism. Even before her royal life, she was an actress in Hollywood, trained in the art of presenting a narrative. Every detail matters. Costume designers know this. Jewelry isn't just sparkle, it's message. Meghan brought that same strategy into her royal life. And so every time she wore Diana's jewels, the story wasn't about Harry's wife making a fashion choice. It was about Meghan deliberately stepping into Diana's shadow, or, as some would argue, trying to seize it. But here's where it gets darker. For years, critics accused Meghan of using Diana's legacy as a shield. Every time public criticism hit her, she leaned into Diana's imagery. The earrings, the bracelet, the aquamarine cocktail ring. Meghan didn't just wear them. She wore them during interviews, speeches, tours, precisely when headlines about her were fiercest. Coincidence? Or a calculated play for sympathy and alignment with the most beloved royal figure of the modern era? Now let's add another twist. Meghan wasn't just accused of exploiting Diana's jewelry. She was also linked to questionable jewelry choices beyond Diana's collection. Remember the scandal over her Middle Eastern earrings? In 2018, Meghan wore glittering chandelier earrings given as a wedding gift by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, a man later accused of orchestrating the brutal murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The timing was chilling. By the time Meghan wore the earrings during the Australia tour, international reports had already connected MBS to the killing. The palace scrambled. Meghan's team claimed she didn't know. But critics pounced. How could a senior royal, with access to briefings and advisors, not be aware? The earrings weren't just jewelry. They became a symbol of poor judgment, of hypocrisy. Meghan had spoken passionately about human rights, yet wore gifts from a man accused of silencing a journalist. The contradiction was devastating. And here's where the pattern sharpens. Meghan's jewelry choices consistently seemed to intersect with scandal. When she wanted to project strength, she wore Diana's pieces. When she wanted to project wealth, she wore pieces linked to questionable donors. When she wanted to project independence, she wore bold, oversized jewelry as statements of rebellion. Each time, the jewels became the story. Not her words, not her actions, the jewels. Ask yourself, why does jewelry follow Meghan this way? Is it chance? Or is it deliberate storytelling? A way to craft her image not just in interviews, but visually, symbolically, through every glittering stone? Harry, at first, saw it as connection. He once said it made him feel closer to his mother when Meghan wore Diana's pieces. He thought it honored her. But over time, critics argue, even Harry began to sense something more calculated. That Meghan wasn't just paying tribute. She was harnessing Diana's ghost to shield herself. Let's step back. Kate Middleton wears Diana's ring, beloved. Camilla wears jewels from the royal vault, accepted. Meghan wears Diana's earrings during an interview tearing down the monarchy, scandal. It wasn't just the jewelry. It was the context. It was the stage. Meghan didn't wear them quietly at family dinners. She wore them during moments of high drama, moments where symbolism mattered. She wore them as shields. And this brings us to the heart of the controversy. If Meghan has a history of using jewelry to tell stories, then how far would she go? If she wore Diana's bracelet in an interview meant to expose the royals, would she also go as far as trading Diana's jewels in private? That's the question critics are asking. Because if she was willing to turn them into symbols, was she also willing to turn them into cash? The tension escalates when we connect dots. Jewelry tied to scandalous regimes. Jewelry tied to Diana's legacy. Jewelry worn at the exact moments Meghan needed to control the narrative. The pieces aren't coincidences. They're chess moves. And the more the public saw the pattern, the more they began to ask, was Meghan's jewelry collection really about legacy or leverage? Imagine being Harry, caught in the middle. On one hand, he sees Meghan as his mother's successor, wearing Diana's jewels as a tribute. On the other hand, he starts to hear whispers. Whispers that some pieces are missing. Whispers that Meghan's choices are more calculated than he realized. Slowly, the adoration turns into suspicion. Suspicion turns into confrontation. And confrontation leads to the unthinkable. Because if Meghan's controversial history with jewelry was just the surface, what lay beneath it would shake Harry to his core. The story was about to shift from symbolism to evidence. Because soon, Harry would stumble upon something that suggested the jewels weren't just being worn, they were being sold. And that discovery would break everything open. What if the whispers weren't just whispers? What if the suspicions Harry tried to dismiss were suddenly staring him in the face? Undeniable and cruel. That moment came in the quietest way, not with cameras flashing or palace aides rushing in, but with Harry alone in a room, staring down at an open jewelry box that seemed lighter, emptier, and somehow colder than it had ever been before. This is where the story of discovery begins. Picture it. Montecito, the Sussexes' California mansion, far from Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, far from the vaults where royal treasures are meant to be secured. The house is quiet, the children asleep, Meghan away for a meeting. Harry wanders into a private sitting room, the kind where family heirlooms are often tucked away. He opens a drawer, reaches for a familiar velvet box, expecting to feel the reassuring weight of his mother's jewels. And instead, he feels absence. Absence has a weight too, a heavy, sinking one. Inside, the sapphire earrings Diana wore on countless public occasions, gone. The brooch she loved for charity galas, missing. Even smaller, less famous items, the ones only Harry would notice, weren't where they belonged. At first, he thought maybe they'd been misplaced. Perhaps Meghan had taken them out for cleaning, or locked them in another box. But as he dug deeper, the truth didn't add up. Let's pause. Imagine being Harry in this moment. The boy who clutched his mother's hand as paparazzi flashes blinded him. The boy who walked behind her coffin, carrying the weight of grief in silence. Now grown, married, and suddenly staring at empty spaces where her memory should have been preserved. What would that feel like? Anger? Shock? Or something worse, betrayal? The build-up to this discovery wasn't sudden. For months, Harry had noticed inconsistencies. Meghan claiming she couldn't find certain pieces, Meghan brushing off questions, Meghan deflecting with vague answers like, "Oh, I'll look for it later." At first, he trusted her. Of course he did. She was his wife. The woman he had defended at every turn, even against his own family. But when patterns repeat themselves often enough, trust starts to fray. And then came the reports. Tabloids in London whispering about anonymous auctions. Jewelry, they claimed, eerily identical to pieces from Diana's private collection, appearing in catalogs for discreet buyers. Harry dismissed it at first. Tabloids are tabloids. But curiosity nags. Once the thought plants itself, it grows roots. And that night in Montecito, staring into half-empty boxes, those whispers became reality. Here's where it gets even more unsettling. Royal collections are meticulously cataloged. Every piece is logged, photographed, insured. Harry knew what should have been there. He knew the texture of the velvet boxes. He knew the weight of Diana's sapphire bracelet. He wasn't guessing. He was certain, and certainty cut deeper than suspicion ever could. The missing pieces weren't random. They were the ones with the most emotional weight. The butterfly earrings, the aquamarine cocktail ring, a pearl bracelet Diana wore while visiting HIV patients in the 1980s. Each item carried a story of compassion, independence, or survival. And now gone. Harry's heart raced. His stomach turned. He picked up the empty box, running his fingers over the indentation where Diana's ring once rested. That indentation itself felt like an accusation. Empty, cold, silent. But then came the darker thought. If these jewels weren't in the house, where were they? Who had them? And more importantly, who had sent them away? This is where discovery turns into confrontation. Harry confronted Meghan in the way a man confronts someone he loves but fears has betrayed him. Not with rage at first, but with desperation. He asked her plainly, "Where are the jewels?" She denied, casually, as though the question itself were absurd. "They're safe," she said. "You're overthinking. Don't worry about it." But Harry couldn't let it go. The reports about auctions, the missing pieces, the deflections, it didn't add up. He pressed harder. Her responses grew sharper. "They were mine to wear, Harry. They were gifts. Don't you dare act like I don't have a right to them." A right. That word cut him. Gifts. That word shattered him. Because in Harry's heart, they weren't just gifts. They weren't even just jewelry. They were Diana. They were the last pieces of her that he could hold. And now, he was realizing, perhaps too late, that they might have been treated as commodities, sold, traded, turned into money. Now let's inject a twist. Reports suggest Harry discovered not just absence, but evidence. A receipt, tucked away in papers Meghan thought he wouldn't see. An email referencing a private sale. A photograph from an auction house catalog. Nothing explosive on its own, but enough pieces to form a puzzle with only one conclusion. And here's where the audience must ask, what would you do? If you found evidence your spouse had sold your late mother's jewelry, would you forgive them? Confront them? Leave them? Or, like Harry, would you seek justice in the only way left, by turning to the one man who could take everything from her? Because Harry's discovery wasn't the end of the story. It was the spark, the beginning of something much bigger. He realized this wasn't just about jewelry. It was about betrayal of legacy, about disrespecting Diana's memory, about crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. And in that moment, Harry made a choice. He would not be silent. He would not let this slip into the shadows. He would take the discovery to his father, King Charles. He would demand action. But before he could get that far, the confrontation with Meghan exploded. Raised voices. Accusations. Meghan standing her ground, insisting she had done nothing wrong. Harry shaking with fury, insisting she had broken his trust, broken his heart, broken his mother's legacy. The walls of that Montecito home heard more than just a marital spat. They heard the sound of a marriage straining under the weight of ghosts. The ghost of Diana, the ghost of trust, the ghost of betrayal. And then came the moment that sealed Harry's resolve. Meghan, exasperated, snapped. They were only jewels. What's the big deal? Only jewels. To Harry, those two words were unforgivable. To him, they weren't jewels. They were his mother's memory, his mother's legacy, his mother's voice echoing through every piece. And in that instant, Harry realized this wasn't just a fight. This was war. But Meghan wasn't finished. Because as Harry began to piece together the evidence, as he prepared to take it to the king, Meghan prepared her defense. One that would shock Harry even further. Because in Meghan's eyes, she hadn't betrayed anyone. She believed she was entitled. She believed Diana would have approved. She believed she had every right. And that belief would ignite the next chapter. Because if discovery broke Harry's heart, Meghan's defense would harden it into fury. The whispers had turned into evidence. But now, Harry needed confirmation. Rumors and suspicions weren't enough, not when the stakes were this high. If Diana's jewels had truly been sold, there would be a trail. There's always a trail. Money leaves footprints, sales leave records, jewels leave marks. And Harry, driven by both grief and fury, decided he had to follow it wherever it led. This is the chapter where suspicion becomes investigation. Picture the scene. Harry sitting alone late at night, his laptop open, the glow of the screen illuminating a face filled with both determination and heartbreak. He wasn't a detective by training, but desperation turns anyone into an investigator. He began searching auction houses, private collectors, catalogs of sales so secret they barely reached the public eye. And then he saw it. A sapphire bracelet, strikingly familiar. Listed not by Diana's name, of course. Auction houses are careful about that. Instead, it was described as a rare royal piece with impeccable provenance. No names, just hints. But the description matched perfectly. Too perfectly. The photos, blurred, discreet, revealed the exact curve, the exact setting Harry remembered from his mother's wrist. It was like seeing Diana herself being sold. Harry dug deeper. He discovered more listings. An aquamarine ring, described as a large stone worn by a figure of global renown. A brooch associated with charitable events in the 1980s. No direct mention of Diana, but for Harry, the descriptions were unmistakable. Each one was a ghost of his mother. Each one was an echo of her legacy being silenced for cash. But how? How could these items, meant to be protected, have slipped into the marketplace? This is where the word private becomes key. Private auctions don't operate like Sotheby's with fanfare and headlines. They operate in the shadows, catering to discreet buyers who want treasures without questions. Collectors, billionaires, royalty from other nations. People who thrive on exclusivity, who crave owning a piece of history, even if that piece was never meant to be sold. And who, Harry asked himself, would have the access to deliver Diana's jewels into those shadows? The answer, painfully, was unavoidable: Meghan. But Harry wasn't content with speculation. He needed something tangible. And so he began to look through household papers, emails, receipts, things most couples would never dare to snoop through. But Harry felt he had no choice. And then, the bombshell. An email. A correspondence between Meghan's representative and a discreet jewelry broker. Language like, the item has historical significance. Mentions of confidentiality, of discretion, of non-disclosure for the seller's protection. Nothing named outright, but enough that Harry's blood ran cold. Then came the receipts. Invoices marked with initials. Payments routed through holding companies. And, most damning of all, descriptions that lined up with the missing pieces. Harry's hands trembled as he held the papers. His mind replayed the image of his mother, Diana, smiling at a child during a hospital visit, her pearl bracelet catching the light. Diana, waving to crowds, her sapphire earrings sparkling under flashbulbs. And now, those very jewels reduced to line items on a sales report. It wasn't just betrayal. It was desecration. Pause for a moment, audience. Ask yourself, if you discovered your spouse had secretly sold pieces of your late mother's memory, how would you react? Would you confront them? Would you call the police? Or, like Harry, would you turn to the only authority higher than both of you, the king himself? But before Harry could get that far, he needed to understand the scale. Were we talking about one or two pieces? Or was it larger, a pattern, a series of sales stretching back months, maybe years? The deeper he dug, the more horrifying it became. The butterfly earrings, gone. The aquamarine cocktail ring, suspiciously absent. The brooch Diana wore to AIDS charity events, sold discreetly to a Middle Eastern buyer. And whispers that even more pieces had been evaluated for sale. This is where the palace quietly enters the picture. Royal advisors, tipped off by whispers in the London art world, began investigating too. Auctioneers had noticed. Collectors had gossiped. Someone had told someone else that Diana's pieces were floating around in hushed transactions. And when those whispers reached Buckingham Palace, alarms went off. Harry wasn't alone in following the trail, but unlike the palace, his investigation wasn't about optics. It was personal, raw, emotional. Here's the emotional contradiction. Meghan argued, when confronted, that these items were hers to do with as she pleased. Gifts, she said, symbols of her role as Harry's wife. But Harry knew better. Yes, some items had been worn by Meghan. Yes, some had been given to her for use. But gifts? Permanent ownership? No. They were always Diana's legacy, meant to be preserved for the bloodline, not pawned off to strangers with fat wallets. And so, in Harry's eyes, this wasn't just misjudgment. It was theft. The receipts proved the sales. The auctions confirmed the buyers. The trail led all the way from Montecito to private vaults in far-off countries, where billionaires now locked away jewels that once sparkled in Diana's presence. Now imagine the fury brewing inside Harry. A man who once risked everything to protect Meghan from his family now realized he had to protect his family's legacy from Meghan herself. The betrayal wasn't only about jewels. It was about trust, about loyalty, about marriage. And so Harry did what few thought he ever would. He decided the situation had spiraled beyond a marital spat. It had become a royal crisis. It was no longer a question of husband and wife. It was a question of crown and subject. Harry picked up the phone. He called his father. And in that call, one phrase echoed louder than any other. She has to be stripped of her titles. But before the king could make a decision, Meghan prepared her counter. Because she wasn't about to let Harry's discovery destroy her carefully crafted image without a fight. And her defense would not only shock Harry, but split the palace in two. Because Meghan's claim was this, Diana would have wanted her to. Harry's rage wasn't the quick flare of temper people sometimes imagine him having. It wasn't a slammed door or a shouted word followed by silence. No, this was something deeper. A slow burn that started in his chest and spread like fire, consuming everything he thought he knew about his marriage, his wife, and his ability to trust. Because when you're betrayed by someone you love, the anger doesn't come in one blow. It comes in waves. First shock, then denial, then fury. And for Harry, the fury arrived with the full weight of his mother's memory pressing down on him. Think about it. This was the boy who grew up clutching Diana's memory like oxygen. He admitted, years later, that he kept her photos in secret places, that he replayed memories in his mind so he wouldn't forget the sound of her laugh. The boy who walked behind her coffin, head down, fists clenched, trying not to cry while the world watched. He had sworn, silently, that her name would never be tarnished, her memory never betrayed. And now, the woman he left everything for, the woman he fought the world for, was the one accused of doing the betraying. Harry snapped. The confrontation was volcanic. He stormed into the room where Meghan sat, receipts and emails in his hands, his face flushed with grief and rage. How could you, he demanded. How could you touch my mother's things, let alone sell them? Meghan, caught off guard, tried to defend herself. They were gifts, Harry. You gave them to me. I wore them. They're mine. Why shouldn't I decide what to do with them? But to Harry, those words were daggers. His voice broke as he shouted back. They weren't mine to give. They were hers. They were supposed to be for our children, for her grandchildren, for her legacy. Not for money. Not for you to parade around or pass off to strangers. Meghan's calm began to crack. She pushed back, her tone sharp, defensive. You don't understand. Diana would have wanted me to carry her spirit. She would have wanted me to use those jewels, not hide them in a box collecting dust. She would have approved. That was the final blow. Harry slammed the table. Don't you dare speak for her. Don't you dare tell me what my mother would have wanted. Silence hung in the air. Heavy. Tense. Harry's hands shook as he held the receipts, his tears falling onto the papers. He saw the ink blur under the water of his grief. He wasn't just angry. He was broken. And yet, even in the middle of rage, there was clarity. He realized this wasn't about financial loss. It wasn't about jewels. It wasn't about auctions or collectors or emails. It was about something far worse. The feeling that his wife had never respected the one thing he loved most, his mother's memory. He thought back to all the times Meghan had worn Diana's jewelry. The butterfly earrings on tour. The aquamarine ring on their wedding night. The diamond bracelet during Oprah. He had looked at her then with pride, feeling Diana's presence through her. And now, in hindsight, each moment twisted into something bitter, something manipulative. The rage fed on that bitterness. His chest heaved, his voice cracked as he shouted, You've used her. You've used her name, her image, her legacy, and now her jewels. Was it ever about me? Or was it always about her? That question hung between them like a guillotine. Meghan, her face hardening, didn't back down. This is about us, Harry. About our life. We've been cut off from the royals. We need to build our future. You think your family was going to give us anything? You think they care? I did what I had to do for us. For us. Those two words rang hollow. Harry heard not partnership, but justification. He heard the rewriting of betrayal as sacrifice. He heard someone using love as a shield for choices that felt unforgivable. And with every word Meghan spoke, Harry's rage grew colder, sharper. He remembered Diana's voice, the way she had once described her life in the royal family. There were 3 of us in this marriage. And Harry thought bitterly, now there are 3 of us in mine too. Me, Meghan, and the ghost of my mother she keeps dragging into it. The rage twisted into action. Harry couldn't sit still. He couldn't trust Meghan's words, her defenses, her reassurances. He began calling confidants, whispering to advisors, speaking in hushed tones with people he had once sworn he'd never involve in his private marriage. He told them what he found. He told them what he feared. And above all, he told them what he wanted, justice for Diana. Justice, in Harry's mind, meant titles. Meghan's titles. The Duchess of Sussex. The royal styling she wielded like a weapon. If she had disrespected the family, disrespected his mother, then she didn't deserve the crown's protection. That was the logic forming in Harry's fury. But rage has consequences. When Harry began murmuring to his father's aides about stripping Meghan's titles, word spread. Advisors raised eyebrows. Phones buzzed. William, hearing whispers of his brother's fury, demanded answers. And soon, the palace wasn't just quietly watching. It was preparing for impact. And still, Harry's fury raged on. He walked the halls of his home at night, muttering to himself. He clutched Diana's photo, apologizing to her, swearing he would fix this. He replayed his childhood memories, feeling once again like the little boy no one protected. Except now, the betrayal came not from the tabloids, not from his father, not from Camilla or the courtiers, but from the woman he had sacrificed everything for. The fury didn't burn out. It hardened him. It made him resolve that if Meghan wouldn't respect Diana, then she would lose the right to call herself part of Diana's legacy. And that meant going to the king. But Meghan wasn't finished. If Harry was fueled by rage, she was fueled by something just as potent, defiance. She wasn't going to let him take everything from her without a fight. And her defense would turn this private marital implosion into a palace-wide scandal. Because Meghan's argument wasn't only that she had a right. It was that the crown itself had no power over her anymore. And that claim would ignite the next firestorm. Harry's rage had shaken the walls of their Montecito mansion, but Meghan wasn't the type to crumble under pressure. Not in front of Harry. Not in front of anyone. If Harry's discovery had cracked open the scandal, Meghan's defense would harden it into open war. Because Meghan wasn't about to stand in silence and let herself be stripped bare. No, she was ready to fight back. This chapter is where Meghan's voice takes center stage. And the way she defended herself stunned not only Harry, but those who later learned of her words. Let's set the scene. Harry has just accused her, papers in hand, proof that Diana's jewels were missing and linked to shadowy sales. His face is red with fury, his hands trembling. He demands answers. Meghan, seated, arms crossed, leans back in defiance. Her silence stretches long enough to sting. And then she speaks. They were mine, Harry. You gave them to me. I wore them. You said they connected me to your mother. You told me they were for me. Those words pierced him. Harry remembered saying things like that in happier days, when Meghan first wore Diana's butterfly earrings, when he told her, she'd be proud of you. But to hear them twisted now, used as justification for disappearing jewels, made his stomach turn. Harry snapped back. No, they weren't mine to give. They were hers, always hers. They were meant for her grandchildren, not to be sold off. But Meghan didn't flinch. Her tone turned icy, almost rehearsed, like she had anticipated this day. You don't understand. Diana would have wanted me to use them. She would have wanted me to honor her. Keeping them locked in a box isn't honoring her. Sharing them, letting the world see them, that honors her spirit. It was audacious. It was bold. It was Meghan's classic style, turning accusation into justification, painting herself not as the villain but as the guardian of Diana's memory. Pause here. Audience, ask yourself, was this clever manipulation? Or did Meghan truly believe her own words? Could she have convinced herself that selling Diana's jewels wasn't betrayal, but preservation? Harry didn't buy it. His voice cracked with disbelief. Honor her? By pawning her life's treasures to strangers? By making money off her name? That's not honor. That's exploitation. But Meghan doubled down. We needed it, Harry. We've been cut off. No royal funding, no security, no support. How did you think we'd survive? Do you think Netflix is enough? Do you think Spotify was enough? You call it betrayal. I call it survival. Survival. That was Meghan's keyword. She framed it not as greed, not as betrayal, but as necessity, as if every sale had been an act of protection, not profit. Harry's face darkened. Survival? My mother's legacy wasn't meant to fund luxury houses and Hollywood parties. It was meant to live on in her family, in her children, not to be liquidated. But Meghan's voice rose to match his. Your family never protected us. They stripped us of everything. And you think they care about Diana's jewels? No, Harry. I cared. I wore them. I gave them life again. I kept her alive. Without me, they would have gathered dust in some vault. I made sure she was remembered. And here comes the shocking twist. Meghan's defense wasn't just that she had a right to the jewels. It was that Diana herself, she claimed, would have approved. I am the only one who knows what it was like to stand against that family, she said, tears glinting in her eyes. I am the one who understands her pain. That's why I wore her things. That's why I kept them close. And yes, if I chose to pass them on, it was because I believed she would want me to. Because she and I are the same. The same. That word sent shivers through Harry. He exploded. Don't you dare compare yourself to her. You will never be her. But Meghan held her ground. I never said I was her. I said I understood her. And maybe that's why you can't see it. You loved her as your mother. I carried her as my guide. That gives me a right you'll never accept. Audience, pause and think. Was this genuine conviction, or was it Meghan spinning a defense so tight even she believed it? When someone ties themselves to an icon, to a martyr, they blur the lines between homage and exploitation. And Meghan's words blurred those lines until they were almost unrecognizable. Harry's fury only deepened. To him, this was blasphemy. To compare herself to Diana. To claim rights she never had. To justify sales as though they were blessings from the grave. But Meghan's strategy was clear. If she framed herself as Diana's spiritual successor, then every criticism from Harry became not just a marital argument, but an attack on Diana's imagined wishes. Clever, calculated, dangerous. And Meghan didn't stop there. She twisted the knife further. Titles or no titles, Harry, I'm not afraid. They can strip me of anything they want. I will always be Meghan. I will always have a voice. And if they try to silence me, the world will see me as they saw Diana, the outsider, the truth-teller, the woman destroyed by the crown. There it was, the unspoken threat. Meghan casting herself as Diana reborn, daring the palace to challenge her, daring Harry to choose between her and his family. For Harry, it was unbearable. His rage turned into desperation. His marriage was collapsing under the weight of contradictions. He saw before him not the woman he once swore to protect, but someone who had, in his eyes, betrayed everything he valued most. And so, his next step was inevitable. He had no choice left. He would take this to the king. He would ask his father to act, to strip Meghan of her titles, to make a public stand that Diana's memory would not be sold, that the monarchy would not be mocked. But Harry wasn't the only one reaching out. Because as he prepared to involve Charles, whispers inside the palace grew louder. Advisors, courtiers, and even William himself began discussing the unthinkable. And behind those palace walls, the question no one thought they'd ever hear was asked. What if the Duchess of Sussex could be stripped of her crown? The fury inside Harry had reached its breaking point. Rage had boiled into desperation, and desperation into resolve. There was only one man left who could intervene. One man who carried both the authority of the crown and the burden of being Diana's former husband. One man who could decide whether Meghan Markle would remain Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex, or whether that title would vanish forever. That man was King Charles. Harry didn't pick up the phone lightly. The act itself felt like betrayal. Betrayal of the vows he had once made to Meghan, betrayal of the independence he had sworn to build in California. For years, he had positioned himself against the firm, against his father, against the very institution that shaped his childhood pain. But this was different. This wasn't about Meghan versus the crown anymore. This was about Diana. This was about his mother. And for Diana, Harry was willing to turn to the very father he once resented. Imagine the call. Late night in California, morning in London. Charles, weary, his voice gravelly, carrying the exhaustion of both age and reign. Harry, pacing, sweating, his voice cracking as he explained what he'd found. The missing jewels, the auction listings, the receipts, the evidence pointing back to Meghan. "Pa," he said, voice breaking, "she's been selling Mum's things. The things meant for us, for our children. The things you promised would always be safe. She's betrayed me. She's betrayed Mum." For a long moment, silence. Charles didn't interrupt. He let the weight of Harry's words settle. And then, slowly, Charles sighed. "I always feared something like this," he murmured. That sentence hit Harry like a slap. Did his father know? Had he suspected Meghan all along? Was this why courtiers had looked at her with such skepticism? Why William had bristled at her presence? Why Camilla had warned Harry to be careful? Charles didn't say more, but Harry pressed on. His voice sharpened with urgency. "This can't be ignored. She can't stay a duchess after this. She can't be allowed to hold on to titles she's desecrated. For Diana's sake, for the crown's sake, for all of us, you need to strip her titles." Let's pause here. Think about the enormity of that request. A son begging his father to strip his wife of her royal identity. It wasn't just a plea. It was a declaration that the marriage itself was collapsing, that Harry no longer trusted Meghan, that he believed she had crossed a line so grave it demanded the harshest royal punishment. And Charles knew exactly what such a move meant. Stripping titles isn't symbolic. It's nuclear. It's irreversible. It sends a message to the entire world that the individual is no longer recognized as part of the royal framework. Diana herself lost her HRH styling after the divorce, a humiliation that stung her deeply. To strip Meghan would be to repeat history, but this time with even sharper teeth. Charles listened, and then he asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. "Harry, are you certain?" Harry's voice cracked. "I've seen the proof. I've held the receipts in my hand. She admits it in her own way, says she did it for survival. But this wasn't survival. This was betrayal." Charles sighed again. "If this becomes public, it will destroy her. It will destroy you. It will destroy what little peace remains." Harry fired back. "It's already destroyed. She destroyed it when she sold Mum's jewels. She destroyed it when she lied to me. Pa, you have to do this. If you don't, then what message does it send? That Diana's memory can be bought? That her legacy is for sale? That you, as king, will do nothing while your daughter-in-law pawns off your late wife's treasures?" That last line silenced Charles. It wasn't just Harry's anger speaking anymore. It was a direct challenge. A son appealing to his father not just as parent, but as monarch, as custodian of the family's legacy. Inside Buckingham Palace, advisors were already murmuring. Whispers had reached the corridors. Auctioneers had confirmed suspicions. William had begun asking questions of his own. Princess, and ever pragmatic, had quietly voiced what others feared to say aloud. If she's betrayed the family once, she'll do it again. But stripping Meghan's titles wasn't a decision Charles could make lightly. It required not only royal decree, but also parliamentary involvement. It would set a precedent, and it would ignite a media storm unlike anything the monarchy had faced in decades. Still, Harry pressed. His rage, his grief, his desperation poured through every word. He reminded Charles of Diana's funeral, of the promises they made to honor her legacy, of the duty they owed not just to her memory, but to the people who still worshipped her as the people's princess. "Pa," Harry whispered, his voice breaking. "If you let this go, then you've let her go. All of her. And I can't live with that. I won't." Charles closed his eyes, the weight of the crown pressing heavier than ever. On one hand, he saw the monarchy teetering, already strained by scandal and change. On the other, he saw his son, broken, begging for justice. And for a moment, just a moment, Charles considered it. He pictured Meghan's titles revoked, her standing erased, her identity stripped. He pictured her as Meghan Markle, once again, not Duchess, not HRH, not royal in any sense. He pictured the headlines, the cheers from Meghan's critics, the cries of outrage from her supporters. He pictured William's nod of approval, Camilla's satisfaction, Anne's relief. He pictured Diana's face, young, radiant, betrayed. But then he also pictured the fallout. Harry's marriage in ruins. Meghan on television, giving interviews, painting herself once again as the victim. The monarchy dragged back into the mud of public opinion. The United States rallying to Meghan's side. The choice wasn't just between justice and forgiveness. It was between stability and chaos. Charles told Harry he would think on it. He promised he would consult his advisors. He promised he would take it seriously. But Harry wasn't satisfied. His voice grew sharper, more frantic. Thinking isn't enough. Action has to be taken, Pa. She's made a mockery of us. If you won't protect Mum's legacy, then what's the point of any of this? The call ended without resolution. But inside Buckingham Palace, wheels began to turn. Meetings were called. Options were laid out. And for the first time since Harry and Meghan left the UK, the possibility of stripping titles wasn't just a tabloid fantasy. It was being discussed at the highest level. But Meghan wasn't blind to this. She knew Harry had gone to his father. She knew whispers were building. And Meghan, defiant as ever, began preparing her counterattack. Because if the king dared to move against her, she was ready to unleash secrets that would shake the monarchy to its core. Inside Buckingham Palace, the walls seemed to hum with whispers. Courtiers, aides, private secretaries, all circling one question that had been unthinkable just months before. Could Meghan Markle really be stripped of her titles? It wasn't a casual rumor. It wasn't tabloid chatter. This time, it came from the top, from Harry himself, his voice thick with fury as he begged his father to act. Now, the advisors who had spent years managing scandals, smoothing crises, and containing the fallout of Harry and Meghan's departure were forced to confront the unimaginable. And as always in the palace, there were divisions. Some argued swift action was essential. If jewels have gone missing, one senior aide whispered during a late-night meeting, and if they've surfaced in private auctions, we are not just facing a marital dispute. We are facing a constitutional embarrassment. To do nothing would be to condone it. Others shook their heads in horror. Stripping Meghan's titles, they warned, would trigger global chaos. It would make her a martyr, one advisor countered. She'll run straight to the cameras. She'll sit down with Oprah, with Netflix, with anyone who'll listen. And she'll spin it as proof the monarchy destroys women. Do you want Diana's story rewritten through Meghan's mouth? The king sat in silence at these meetings, letting his advisors volley arguments across the table. He had always been deliberate, cautious, but even he knew this was different. Diana's legacy wasn't just personal. It was sacred to the British public. And if the perception grew that Meghan had betrayed it, silence might look like weakness. That's where Princess Anne came in. The king's sister, the no-nonsense, hardest-working royal, was blunt. In one meeting, she leaned forward, hands clasped, and said in her famously sharp tone, "She's compromised us before. She'll do it again. Titles are privileges, not rights. If she's misused them, or worse, if she's profited from them, they should be revoked." Anne's words hit like a hammer. Practical, unflinching. Then William spoke. The heir to the throne, Diana's eldest son, didn't mince words either. His voice was colder, sharper than his father's. This isn't just about titles. This is about Mom. Those jewels were hers. They were meant for us, for our children, not for strangers in glass cases halfway across the world. If we let this pass, we dishonor her. And we look like fools. The room fell silent. Everyone knew William's bond with Diana had been fierce. If he, the future king, demanded action, then Charles's hand would be harder to steady. But not everyone agreed. Camilla, the queen consort, urged caution. She knew too well what it meant to be branded the villain by public opinion. If you strip her titles, she warned, you elevate her. She will claim persecution. She'll wear it like armor. You think you're punishing her, but you'll make her more powerful. The advisors murmured. The tension thickened. Some nodded with Camilla, others with Anne and William. The king rubbed his temples, torn between the voices of reason and the voices of fury. And then came the practical questions. Could titles even be stripped? Yes, it had precedent. Edward VIII was demoted after abdicating. Diana lost her HRH after divorce. But Meghan's case would be different. She wasn't divorced. She hadn't abdicated. She was still, on paper, the Duchess of Sussex. Stripping her would require either a direct royal decree, risking backlash, or an act of parliament. Both options were messy. Both would drag the monarchy back into the political spotlight. Do we want the Commons debating Meghan Markle? One advisor asked bitterly. Because that is what will happen. But another snapped back. Do we want the world debating why Diana's jewels are vanishing? Because that is happening already. This was the split. Stability versus justice. Silence versus action. Protect the monarchy's long-term survival, or defend Diana's legacy at any cost. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, the press was circling like vultures. Reporters had begun sniffing around auction houses. Anonymous sources whispered of items with royal provenance, changing hands for millions. Tabloids hinted at a scandal involving Diana's collection. They didn't have the full story yet, but everyone in the palace knew it was only a matter of time. And time, in the monarchy, is always the deadliest enemy. William pressed harder. If we don't act before it breaks, we'll look reactive, weak, complicit, and she'll have the upper hand. Again, and nodded in agreement. You either cut out rot before it spreads, or you watch the whole structure crumble. Camilla countered. And if you swing too hard, you cut away healthy parts too. The boy still loves her.